We need a shake and therefore even more than the conclusion of the only impossible thing is to eliminate the impossible background of necessity to restore the core is a triumph of human spirit, triumph of the will. Everything remains to be done.
Au Grand Jour by the Stereolab. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We turn now to look at how a limousine crash that killed 20 people Saturday in upstate New York is linked to a man who is an FBI informant long accused of lying to the government and getting away with it. The crash in the town of Schoharie was the deadliest U.S. transportation disaster since 2009. The limousine had failed an inspection last month and was not licensed to be on the road. The New York Times reports that shortly before the crash, one of the victims sent a text message to a friend saying she was worried about the limo's condition. It has since been revealed the company that owned the car had a record of repeated safety violations. Earlier this year, it was issued written violations after vehicles by the New York State Police and the Department of Transportation. On Wednesday, state officials arrested the operator of Prestige Limousine Chauffeur Service and charged him with criminally negligent homicide. He is Noman Hussain, the son of a Pakistani immigrant named Malik Shahid Hussain, who is the company's owner and also an FBI informant.
In 2001, Malik Shahid Hussain was arrested for helping people cheat on driver's license tests. In exchange for avoiding deportation, he took a job as an FBI confidential informant, posing as a radical arms dealer in FBI sting operations. Hussain was a key figure in the FBI's case against the so-called Newburgh Four, four Black Muslim men sentenced to 25-year prison terms after they were convicted for placing what they thought were bombs in a New York synagogue in 2010. Defense attorneys say the men were entrapped by Hussain. We turn now to a Pittsburgh man who was entrapped by Hussain. His name is Khalifa al-Akili. He just finished serving nearly 8 years in federal prison and was released September 25th. In a moment, we're going to speak to him directly. He's in a halfway house. But first, we want to turn to a clip from the documentary Terror. That's T in parentheses and the word error, terror, where Khalifa al-Akili describes how Hussain, then working as an FBI informant in Pittsburgh under the name of Muhammad, tried to recruit him for a terror plot.
It was so clear that I didn't want to meet these guys. Like, seriously, like I literally made up excuse after excuse after excuse. The next morning, walked up here to the corner, and that's when, quote unquote, Muhammad came from around the corner, just appeared out of nowhere. He had his hotel downtown Pittsburgh, and yet he was here in Wilkinsburg at 9:30 in the morning without no car, no vehicle. He just so happened to have that card for my mother on him. I reluctantly agreed to go to McDonald's and have some coffee with him. The morning that we all came in here, we actually sat at this first booth right here, and that's whenever he began to talk about his people being involved in jihad and whatnot and fighting.
Khalifa al-Akili joins us now on the telephone from Pittsburgh. Khalifa, welcome to Democracy Now! Congratulations on getting out of prison after almost 8 years. When you heard about this news of the worst U.S. traffic accident in almost a decade, and that the limousine that was used, that was illegally on the road, was owned by the FBI informant who led to your imprisonment. Can you talk about your response and exactly who Shahid Hussain is?
Yeah, good morning, Amy. I was completely devastated by this news. The fact that this man is allowed continue to live among citizens and to be out here when this guy he's a rodent. He's a liar. He's a thief. He's a criminal. He's a scam artist, and he's a danger to society. And the fact that this took place, and more than likely that the money that was used to build this company was money that was paid to him by our government. I mean, this is ridiculous because he's an asset to our government and he's bringing them manufactured cases of terrorism. This is why he's allowed to continue to stay in this country and to flourish and to run these illegal businesses in which he's constantly cutting corners. And it's just sad. 20 people die as a result of this guy's negligence. I mean, this is sick.
Khalifa, talk about how you met Hussein.
Yeah, I met him through the other informant that was involved in the case, Sharif. He told me one day, he said, "Hey, man, my brother's coming in from out of town, and I really want you to meet him. He's a real resourceful guy, and I think you guys will get along, be able to relate." And so that's how the initial introduction was made. I only met this guy once or twice on two different occasions. And, I didn't want to meet him from the very beginning because I already knew that he was an informant. I knew that he was trying to entrap me. But he was very aggressive in trying to pursue me and to sit down with me, to talk with me. And it's just sad, man, to hear this news. It really is.
Can you talk about where you're speaking to us from and how his actions led to your imprisonment?
Yeah, sure. I'm speaking from Pittsburgh. I'm in a halfway house. Right now, I'm just focused on trying to, my transition back into society, to reunite with my family. And this guy's actions it led to my imprisonment because of his attempts to entrap me. And then after I publicly exposed him, then the government came in with a 2-year-old picture of me and some friends having fun at a gun range and used that to indict me and give me a rack of years in federal prison. And yet this guy is responsible for directly or indirectly for the homicide of 20 people, and he's not going to do a day in jail.
How did you figure out he was an FBI informant?
Yeah, I knew because I knew that Sharif was an FBI informant. So the fact that this guy was introducing me to another guy, I knew immediately.
Mm-hmm. Well, Khalifa, I don't want you to get in trouble. You're at a halfway house, and I know you have to get off the air at 1:30. So I want to thank you very much for joining us. Khalifa Al-Akili joining us, talking about how he was entrapped by Malik Shahed Hussein, who is the man who owns the Prestige limousine service, the limousine that was illegally on the road. A number of his cars had failed inspection. And yet this limousine carried 20 people, the driver and 17 friends between the age of, I think, 24 and 34, who were all going to a 30th birthday party. 2 of the couples in the car had just gotten married. The driver, of course, killed, and 2 bystanders. We're joined now by 2 other guests who can talk about the man who owns this service. Not exactly clear where he is right now. His son has been arrested on manslaughter charges as a result of the accident. Here in New York, Sam Braverman joins us, an attorney who represented one of the Newburgh Four, who were convicted after Shahed Hussein led the group and organized the scheme. He'll tell us about that. And in Los Angeles, Lyric Cabral is with us, co-director of the film Terror. That's T in parentheses and the word error, terror, a documentary that follows undercover FBI informant Saeed Sharif Torres, who Khalifa was just talking about, another FBI informant. Lyric, we met you at the Sundance Film Festival, this astounding film a few years ago. If you can finish Khalifa's story for us, how he figured out who Shahed was and the significance. I mean, he not only was involved in the jailing of men in Pittsburgh, but also, as we'll talk about with Sam Braverman, the men in New York who were then entrapped and are serving decades in prison at this point. Lyric.
Yes. So Shahed Hussein in Pittsburgh, he was going by the name Muhammad. And he had been assigned there, presumably to investigate Khalifa al-Akhili. But because of the Newburgh 4 case, because that was such a publicly critiqued example of entrapment, during that trial, Shahed Hussein was photographed and was exposed. His photograph was placed on, actually, it was the front cover of the New York Times. And so because of all the publicly available information, in part due to Sam Braverman and other defense attorneys on the Newburgh 4 team, there was basically this publicly available information about Shahed Hussein, including recordings that he made of the Newburgh 4 that were entered as government evidence during their trial in 2009. So all of this was sort of public. And so when Khalifa had his suspicions about Hussein, Shahed Hussein in Pittsburgh under the name Muhammad gave Khalifa a business card with a number. And Khalifa, due to his suspicions, he Googled that phone number and it referenced a number in one of the Newburgh 4 trial transcripts that was publicly available. So Khalifa, through this Google search, was able to actually confirm on paper that Shahed Hussein was an informant.
I mean, that is simply amazing. This guy gives him his number. He's very nervous about him, and he checks it out on Google. And he sees it's the number of the FBI informant in the Newburgh 4 case, which brings us to Sam Braverman.
Good morning.
Hi, it's great to have you with us. Talk about this case in Newburgh. Yes, it was front page news, but I think for many people in this country, it's long been forgotten about as they rot away in jail.
Oh, absolutely true. So the trial is essentially Maqsood. That was his nickname in our case. Of course, I don't think anybody could honestly say they know what his real name is because he did so much immigration fraud on his original asylum application. So I don't think anybody believes that. He could be Fred. I mean, nobody knows his real name. But beyond that, he comes to Newburgh. He's tasked to go into Newburgh. He goes into mosques, and he's specifically tasked.
Newburgh, a very depressed town.
Newburgh is a very depressed town. He was in Wappingers Falls before originally, and he went into a mosque, and people said, "Get out of here. Get out of here." He went to the Newburgh Mosque, and the imam there said, "Get out of here."
Why? Why were they telling him to leave?
They were telling him to leave because he was in there to say, "Let's have a jihad, let's have a holy war." And the people in the mosque were saying, "Well, this has nothing to do with us. We're here to pray. We're here for a peaceful mission." And so he kept getting thrown out of places. And he found a disaffected person in a parking lot. And that's how the Newburgh case began. And his name was James Cromedy. So James Cromedy was a loudmouth by his own absolute admission. He shot off his mouth endlessly. And then, like Khalifa, one day he said, I don't have any interest in this man anymore, and hid for a month and a half. Hid. The FBI knew exactly where he was because they were trailing him everywhere. But every time that Maqsood would knock on his door, he was hiding behind the door. Or he'd call him. He'd say, "Oh, I'm out of town. I'm in Philly, wherever I am." But the FBI was paying Maqsood to do something. He had a job like a salesman. So as a salesman, he only gets paid if he makes the sale. And he has to tell the person who wants to make the sale, "Let me tell you anything you want to hear." So in our trial, Maqsood Shahed Hussein said things like, "I'll give you $250,000, a barbershop, free cars, free travel." My client, Laguerre Payen, was totally impoverished, and my client was bought for food. So in every meeting, my client is eating. That's how you got my client to join this thing. There's a, if you feed somebody rice and they're starving, they'll believe anything you ask them to believe because they're starving to death, as was my client. So that was the premise that got everybody into this. Once they were there, Shahed Hussein just kept doing things. His everyday task was to make the story better. And the FBI was continually trying to reel him in at the same time. So they're saying, no, don't offer those things. You can offer $5,000. So he went off the reservation and said, no, $250 is good. And then he did these things. And then he lied to his handlers about it. And they didn't know about it until they actually heard the tapes where he said, $250. I offered you $250. You didn't want it. How about a car? So it was endless. And he said, I'm going to fly you on a plane. My client said, I can't go anywhere. I don't have a passport. You're talking about the most uneducated, the most unsalvageable young men. Target him.
This is very significant because Shahed knows enough that he cannot just be offering financial inducements. He has to, as he talks about, the cause. They have to be there for the cause, right. Jihad, not for the money, because that'll get the FBI in trouble. So I want to go to the HBO documentary, The Newburgh Sting, which features secret recordings the FBI made of conversations between the undercover FBI informant Shahed Hussein and James Cromedy, one of the men who became part of the Newburgh 4. You have to listen very closely because, well, So obviously this is surveillance audio. It's hard to understand. The clip begins with Shahed Hussein.
What is your understanding that you make a lot of money and still be on the side of Allah?
That'll be good, but I have to know what I'm gonna do to make the money.
I have a lot of ideas, okay, for you.
You're gonna get some people, it'd be nice. If you get bodies, it'd be nice, okay?
Do you have to use that word, bodies?
But you said that you would be good to get some brothers together.
Don't worry about the brothers. Don't worry, you're gonna meet some brothers. Just be easy.
I'm hoping we can do it.
So that is Shahed Hussein saying you're going to get some brothers together to James Cromedy. And this is another clip from the secret FBI recordings. This one begins with James Cromedy.
None of these brothers got jobs, huh? There's 3 of us without no jobs. Sure. But actually, how do you think we feel? We getting ready to do all this, we ain't got no money in our pockets. How do you think we feel? Look at me, bro. How do you think they feel?
If these brothers are doing for money, I don't need them. Subhanallah.
No, I talked to them already. They already know.
Okay. And
they're not even worried about
it. It is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's all it is. And if they don't need for money or greediness, or they think they're going to make any money or angerness, please do not, because this is jihad. This is jihad. And that's what jihad is.
But you know what they're thinking, They can use the money, though.
So that was Cromedy at the end, who is now in prison, saying, I know you're saying jihad, but they really need the money. Right. So and that's Shahed Hussein. And again, to bring this back for people who are just joining us now, Shahed Hussein, who runs the Prestige limousine service that was involved in this deadly car crash. He was cited numerous times for dangerous vehicles. This one was not supposed to be on the road in Skohari, and it's the one that crashed, killing all 17 people in the car and the driver, as well as 2 passersby.
Right.
So talk about then defending your clients and how they ended up in jail, because these are such damning, not so much of your clients, they're clearly desperate and sometimes trying to get away from him. He's coming up with the plot all the time. He shows them synagogues. He shows them a military base.
So in the case here, there were a lot of different ways. Remember, we are compressing time in a sense, because it starts in early 2008 and it goes all the way to 2009, 9 months of recruitment. And during this 9 months of recruitment, people are leaving. They keep walking away. They can't find people. My client comes in, the first time he appears on tape anywhere, he says to Shahed, by the way, thanks for the job. I really needed a job. It doesn't say I'm here to do damage to the world. I need a job. I mean, literally waifs on the street. So this persistence is what ultimately the FBI is allowed to use to say, let's compress it. What do we have? We have people saying in clips, I'm here for the job. What the trial was about was pulling back that Band-Aid, that bandage that hides the actual wounds. And the wounds were Shahed Hussein doing whatever he wanted to do. And that's the connection with the case here today. It's not because he was an informant then and lied then that he's somehow legally responsible for this. It's because every day of his life and every minute he's ever had, he's had no responsibilities for anything. So he comes and he lies about his immigration and his application for asylum. Never punished. He comes here and he creates a fraudulent business. Never punished. He comes here and he does, and he's never punished. He comes here and he lies at the trial of a bankruptcy application. Never punished. Comes here to trial, and then for this whole case here, lies in every step of the trial, exceeds his authority, makes offers, binds the FBI to things. Never punished. At trial, he lies on the stand. McMahon turns to the jury and says, "This man is lying." Never held accountable for it. The government stands and says, "You're doing a great job." Cases he's done, and now this. So the timeline is for all of us to watch this to say he's never been held accountable in his life for anything. So what does he learn from that? He learns sociopathy, the ability to say without remorse, without any concern, without any hesitation, I'll do whatever I want. So if I want this truck on the road, it goes on the road. And who says no? You, me? No, we're still paying his salary. He's making hundreds of thousands of dollars, doesn't pay taxes on it. He lies and commits felony crimes.
What do you mean he doesn't pay taxes on it?
He didn't pay taxes on it. The government just pays him money.
You mean the FBI?
Yeah, in our trial, it came out that he got $66,000 in the year before our trial. So what does he learn? He learns to do anything he wants. He goes to Pakistan, wherever he is. Who knows if he's actually there? And his son is here to stand up for him. Maybe his son takes the beating for him. I don't know.
When did he leave the US?
Who knows? Who knows? He comes and goes as he pleases. Have you ever been to JFK and see the line to JFK? Do you think he stands on that line? He doesn't. He just disappears. During our trial, he disappeared during the trial, came back. Nobody says we know where he is. The FBI agent Handler, who was on the trial, on the stand, says he goes, did you follow the stand? No. I asked him, how do you know he's not actually a terrorist? Maybe he's the actual terrorist.
Isn't there a question of he first came to the United States from Pakistan fleeing a murder charge? So
he says, right? We don't even have proof of that, but he absolutely said that he was a victim of an unlawful arrest and all these other things. We have no proof that that's true. And they never offered proof that that was true. The only thing we know about the FBI is they said about the four in the trial, they said in a letter, in an internal memorandum, they said, we know these guys are totally incapable of an operation without our informant.
Well, I want to go to comments that have been made, a statement that's been issued by Muslim groups in the U.S. The Muslim Solidarity Committee, Project Salam, and the Coalition for Civil Freedoms issued a statement about Hussein saying, quote, the limousine company is the latest hit on this road of calamity. Shahid Hussein's debt to justice has not been paid. The years spent in prison and the years still to serve for the phony crimes that Hussein engineered for the FBI cannot be recovered for the men he put away. And the terrible irony of a felon convicted as part of a DMV scan who's now responsible for the faulty operation of a vehicle that killed 20 innocent people is not lost on us. So, Lyric Cabral, could you respond to that and also say what you recall from Hussein's testimony? You said that, in fact, you thought he was taking directions from the FBI.
So one of the things that has always troubled me about Hussein in response to the Project Salam statement or that you just read is going back to his initial charge, which was DMV fraud. The FBI always says the FBI's argument is that it needs a criminal to catch a criminal. But going back to that actual act, which was I believe it was in the early 2000s, my question is, why did the FBI choose to hire this individual? Because that very act, for which they could have prosecuted him and put him in jail, is ultimately what killed these people. Fraud, getting vehicles, what he was convicted of, what he should have been convicted of, what the FBI knew that he was doing was helping people to receive driver's licenses illegally. And his son in this accident did not have a license to drive this vehicle. So I have not heard much scrutiny around the FBI. To date, I've not heard the Bureau make a statement about its informant, but I actually question the Bureau, really, and why they chose to employ this individual after knowing his capability around these crimes.
Lyric, you spoke to the mother of David Williams, one of the Newburgh Four. I think they're in jail, for 25 years, when she learned of this horrific car crash that involved the man getting her son in prison. What did she tell you?
Elizabeth McWilliams was just horrified. She's just wondering, like any mother would, she's still trying to get her son out of jail. She understands that despite that injustice occurred. So I think her first response was the legal one. Going back to sort of the point that I spoke on, is there any way that the FBI can be held accountable for this man now that it's clear that the original crime when they hired him is what killed these people ultimately? So she's wondering how this current event might impact her son's charge, might impact David's freedom.
And the last 10 seconds, your response, Sam Braverman,
sure,
when you heard what happened in Schoharie.
It's more of the same for this young man. Hussein does whatever he wants to do throughout his life. And it's not just that there are sociopaths among us, because there are. It's when our government tolerates this sort of craziness, like the last story about Scott, governor in Florida. We'll just tolerate the nonsense. Let's not close our eyes and hide in the sand. If you hide in the sand about the environment, if you hide in the sand about justice, if you hide in the sand about all the issues that are important to us, why do we ever think we should be crediting you? The bottom line is they wrap their arms around a liar. And here's what reaped from what they've sowed.
And as Michael German said in the remarkable film by David Heilbrunner, the HBO film, The Newburgh Sting, quoting Michael German, an FBI agent, after 9/11, after 9/11, his colleagues at the FBI were saying, the rules no longer apply. And he's walking around saying, what are you talking about? The rules no longer apply.
He says the rules, you mean the Constitution? I actually sat with Mike and I watched Lyric's film. It's a great film, and he's a good guy too.
Sam Braverman, lawyer for one of the Newburgh Four, Lyric Cabral, co-director of the award-winning documentary Terror, which is now on Netflix. And we want to thank Khalifa, who joined us from the halfway house in Pittsburgh. We thank you so much, Khalifa Al-Akili, for enlightening us as we continue to try to find out what has taken place on the roads of upstate New York and where, at this point, Shahed Hussein is. His son is in jail. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, How Fascism Works, a new book by Yale professor Jason Stanley. Stay with us.
You are listening to Democracy Now! On KFAI Fresh Air Community Radio. 90.3 FM HD Minneapolis and operating translator K2, 9, 4 AM West St. Paul is 106.7 FM St. Paul. We turn back to Amy in New York.
Una mattina mi sono svegliato, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 una mattina mi sono svegliato e ho trovato l'invaso, ho partigiano, portami via, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 partigiano, portami via, che mi sento vivo. Se sei uomo da partigiano, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 signore, da partigiano, tu ti devi seppellire, e seppellire, nessuno taglio, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 seppellire, nessuno taglio,
Bella Ciao, performed by Modena City Ramblers. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We end today's show with a remarkable new book titled How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them, which focuses in particular on current trends under the Trump administration, arguing that the president is not as much of an anomaly in American history as we often think. The book's author, Yale professor Jason Stanley, whose parents were both Holocaust survivors who came to the U.S. as refugees, shows instead that, quote, in its own history, the United States can find a legacy of the best of liberal democracy as well as the roots of fascist thought. Indeed, Hitler was inspired by the Confederacy and Jim Crow laws, Jason Stanley writes. He also warns of the dangers of normalizing fascist politics, saying, quote, what normalization does is transform the morally extraordinary into the ordinary. It makes us able to tolerate what was once intolerable by making it seem as if this is the way things have always been.
We're joined right now by Jason Stanley, philosophy professor at Yale University. His new book is just out. It's titled How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them. His previous books, How Propaganda Works. Welcome to Democracy Now! Professor, it's great to have you with us. Why now? Why are you releasing this book, How Fascism Works Now?
Well, we have a global ultranationalist far-right movement crossing many countries, Bolsonaro in Brazil, we've just seen, and they feed off each other. So I think right now it's very important to make people aware of the features of fascism, the historical features, and to alert people to the fact that the United States has always been vulnerable to this kind of politics.
Well, explain what fascism, define what it means for you.
So fascism is an ideology based on power. Liberal democracy is based on liberty and equality. Liberty and equality require truth because you need truth to speak truth to power. And if you're lied to, you're not free. No one thinks the people of North Korea are free. They've been lied to. So if you're going to attack liberal democracy and replace it with power, you need to smash truth. So fascism is an ideology based on power and loyalty. It It's based on hyper-nationalism, so one group, loyalty to one group, and one person, the leader, represents that group. It's hyper-masculine and hyper-patriarchal.
You talk about the 10 pillars of fascism. What are they?
The 10 pillars of fascism are, number one, a mythic past, a great mythic past to which the leader harkens back. Number two, propaganda. There's a certain kind of fascist propaganda where everything is inverted. The news is the fake news. Anti-corruption is corruption. So three, anti-intellectualism. As Steve Bannon said, it's emotion, rage gets people to the polls. We got elected on lock her up and build the wall. Hitler in Mein Kampf says, you want your propaganda to appeal to the least educated people. Number four, unreality. You have to smash truth. So reason gets replaced by conspiracy theories. I first started writing, got out of my academic shell in 2011 when I wrote a piece about birtherism, because I saw conspiracy theories coming, and that's a deeply concerning sign. Unreality. So you smash truth, so all that remains is loyalty. Hierarchy. In fascist politics, the dominant group is better than everyone else. They were like the great people in the past who deserve respect just for being them. Victimhood. In fascism, the dominant group are the greatest victims. The men are the greatest victims of encroaching feminism. Whites are the greatest victims of blacks. Germans are the greatest victims of Jews. Law and order. What are they victims of? They're victims of the outgroup, who are criminals. What kind of criminals are there? They're rapists, sexual anxiety. Pillar 9 is Sodom and Gomorrah. The real values come from the heartland. The people in the city are decadent. And Pillar 10 is Arbeit macht frei. Work shall make you free. The outgroup is lazy. They're not just criminals. They're lazy. And social Darwinism, it's all about winning. So.
Well, I want to turn to one of the features of fascism as you identify it, this unreality. Trump was speaking earlier this year, and he took aim at the media, as indeed he has multiple times, using a phrase that prompted comparisons with George Orwell's dystopian novel, 1984.
Just remember, what you're seeing and what you're reading is not what's happening. Because we have to make our country truly great again. Remember, make America great again. And then in 2.5 years, it's called Keep America Great.
So that's Trump speaking earlier this year. And just to say that George Orwell's line reads, the party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. So can you talk about this particular?
That loyalty to him is the only guide. Reality is, of course, the greatest, because fascism is based on power and reality is a way of responding to power. You say it's just false. So you have to make everyone present yourself, and you have to show that you're stronger than reality, because fascism is about machismo and power.
You are the son of Holocaust survivors. How does that weigh in to your scholarly work and what you're seeing now, and whether you believe you can talk about the United States in this way right now?
Well, I remember when I talked to my father about being the son of a Holocaust survivor, and he read me James Baldwin's 1968 piece, The Negroes are anti-Semitic because they're anti-white. And he said, and one of the lines in it, it was, you think you're more connected because of our shared history of oppression? We're more angry at you because of our shared history of oppression, because we know you're glad not to be us. So because of my background, my mother worked in Manhattan criminal court for 33 years. I knew that the United States was replicating features of Nazi Germany and Eastern Europe with respect to its black population. So I was raised with an understanding of racialized mass incarceration. I lived through it. We're still living through it. 9% of the world's prison population is Black American. So I have been continually—
9% of the
world's prison population comes from that tiny group of 38 million people. If the nation of Black America, if the nation of Black America was its own country, it should be the third largest nation on earth. And that's an emergency. So we came in, we've long had this fake news directed against our Black population. And it's completely unsurprising that someone came and then said, hey, you're used to fake news being directed against this population. Let's just generalize it and direct it against everyone.
So what are the antecedents to Trump in America? You say there are. We have about 30 seconds.
The antecedents to Trump are well, the KKK, obviously, the 1930s, the America First movement is an antecedent to Trump. He references it. And throughout, the Nixon is an antecedent to Trump. He ran a harsh law and order campaign in 1968. He slashed social spending to increase crime. So Nixon is a good.
We're going to continue the conversation after the broadcast, and we'll post it under web exclusives at democracynow.org. Jason Stanley, philosophy professor at Yale University. His book is How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them. I'll be speaking tonight in Washington, D.C., interviewing Angela Davis at Busboys and Poets at the 450K location in Washington, D.C. That does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Carla Wills. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. Thanks for joining us.
And it's just about 1 o'clock here on your community radio station, KFAI 90.3 FM, and on the web, kfai.org. And soon we're going to have that 106.7 FM back as soon as they're done working on that water tower. Well, it's time now at 1 o'clock for the Northern Sun Radio News Show with your host, Don Olson, every Thursday at this time. Part of the news and public affairs strip of programming that we have every weekday right after Democracy. And that was very good. Another very good show of Democracy Now! And yesterday on Democracy Now! They had some of the people from the this Climate Direct Action Group here in Minnesota that sort of had won their case. And I have with me in the studio Annette Clapstein, who is one of the 3 defendants that had their case dismissed yesterday. And we have in the studio also 2 filmmakers. We're making a documentary about this action. One is Steve Lipsey, who is one of the people who was originally taping them as they were doing this deed, which we'll talk about in just a second, and who had a kind of a heavy charge right up until about a month ago. And we have also another fellow in here too, John Paul, and they're going to be taking their pictures today. Well, welcome back, Annette, to Northern Sun News.
Thank you, Don.
So your charge 2 years ago was something that been carefully thought out. Why don't you talk about what you did and why you did it?
Okay. We had decided as a group of climate justice activists in the Pacific Northwest that we were not seeing any movement on addressing the severity of the climate change issues in our political system. And we had all been very active in pursuing all the conceivable legal means, testifying at hearings and signing petitions and marching and, lobbying our elected officials and on and on and on. We've all been doing that for years. And we felt that particularly after Dr. James Hansen, who was chief climate scientist at NASA for many, many years, had said that if the tar sands in Alberta were developed, it was game over for the climate. That was kind of a catalyzing moment for all 5 of us who were involved in this action. That was in 2011. And all of us became more intensely active after that time. And most of us had engaged in some sorts of civil disobedience actions around climate before. But we decided that we really needed to target the tar sands pipelines. And over the course of months, a plan was developed to shut down all of the 5 major tar sands pipelines coming into the United States across 4 states. So that was 2 Enbridge lines here in Minnesota, 1 in North Dakota, 1 in Montana, and 1 in the state of Washington. So 5 of us went out on October 11th, 2016, exactly 2 years ago. And 15 minutes apart, we had a person in Seattle call the pipeline companies one by one 15 minutes before we were planning to shut it off. And then in a staggered fashion, starting in Minnesota and moving across North Dakota, Montana, Washington, we cut the chains into the enclosures, went in, and were prepared to shut down the pipelines by manually turning the valves. In the other 3 states, they did actually turn the valves, and eventually the pipeline company shut them down remotely in every case. But in our case, it was clear almost from the beginning that they were shutting it down remotely. We could see it going down. It looked like a giant screw in a transparent container, and we could hear it and see it going down. So we didn't actually have to shut it off ourselves.
Oh, you did?
So we succeeded in our goal, which was to get it shut down, but we got it shut down in the safest conceivable way, which was having the pipeline company shut it off remotely after 2 safety calls, one from our friend Jay in Seattle and one from Ben Joldersma, who was our support person on the site.
Well, as soon as I heard about it, I immediately warmed up to it because of my own personal history, having been involved with a coordinated civil disobedience act back in 1970, namely coordinated draft board raids. But
right,
this is the leading cause of today, which it's at our peril that we don't respond and do anything about it.
Absolutely.
Well, you did something that we could not do, namely you were able to, you got the judge to go along with a defense of necessity.
Yes, just about a year ago, we were out here for a hearing on the necessity defense. We asked for the necessity defense in all of the cases in the 4 different states. We were the only ones that were granted it here in Minnesota. Our judge granted us a hearing, and we all testified, including Mr. Lipte, who's here in the studio today, because he was also charged, even though all he was doing was filming. And after a couple of months, the judge ruled in our favor that we would be able to present the climate necessity defense, which is basically, for those who are unfamiliar with it, it comes out of English common law. And the essence of it is that technically, yes, I've done a crime, but I did it to prevent a greater harm. And the example we usually use is you see a building on fire, and you hear a child crying, and you go to save the child, but the door's locked. So you have to break the door down to get in, and you get charged with burglary. So you go into court and you plead, yes, technically I did commit the crime of burglary because I broke in, but I did it to save the child's life. And that's a greater necessity than, keeping a door intact. So we are in a situation where the whole planet is burning, and all of the children will burn if we don't, do something and do it now. We just had the IPCC report come out on Monday, and it's more dire even, than we had expected before. So we felt then, and we feel now that our action was absolutely necessary. And that is what we argued to the judge. And, somewhat to our surprise, he did rule in our favor 2 years ago. Then we had a process of appeals that went on for nearly a year. And then finally, when the Supreme Court of Minnesota upheld the Court of Appeals, which upheld our judge, then our trial was scheduled.
Pretty amazing,
yeah,
too.
It was. It was indeed. It was a very stressful year waiting for all those decisions, I'll say.
Well, sometimes people, when they look at the judiciary, that they're, as issues and understandings bubble up from below the citizenry, that you will have some judges that will sort of step out of the usual lane,
right,
and make some other decisions. they themselves say, I'm not stupid. I can see what's going on. I'm going to do that.
Right.
How do you look at it?
Well, that was our initial impression, was our judge must be concerned about climate change himself, or why would he have granted this? I mean, we it's speculation. We really don't know why he did, but obviously, he took our testimony, he considered it carefully, and he thought we should be given the opportunity to at least present the evidence to the jury. It didn't necessarily mean that, they were going to find in our favor, but that we should be able to present that evidence. However, last week, we suddenly, 3 days before the trial, we suddenly got a ruling from this same judge saying that he was not going to permit us to bring in any experts to testify on climate change or civil disobedience, which of course was the heart of our case. And we were completely shocked and baffled by that. He said that, we ourselves could testify, but that he was not going to allow any experts on that. And as Emily Johnston has said, that's putting a huge burden on the defendants, because, who are they more likely to believe? The lead climate scientist from NASA, Dr. James Hansen, who was planning to testify for us, or a poet from Seattle? So, it was left to the poet and the retired lawyer and, the computer company person, Ben Joldersma, to try and make our case ourselves, and none of us actually being climate scientists. So we felt that, he'd placed a very nearly impossible burden on us. So we already were going into trial with that hanging over our heads. And then on the second day of trial, after the prosecutor had presented his very brief case, he only put on 2 witnesses, the sheriff and an Enbridge employee. And at the close of that evidence, our lawyer made what is a very standard motion in criminal cases, and asked for motion of judgment of acquittal on the basis that the prosecutor had not proved his case. Now, I practiced law for about 30 years before I retired, and I can tell you that I have never, ever seen a judge grant that motion before. It's just kind of a pro forma motion that is made, on the off chance that the prosecutor's case was so weak that the judge would grant it. But generally, at that stage of the case, the judge feels compelled to give the benefit of the doubt to the prosecutor and wait and see what the defense has to present. So I have never seen a judge grant that. No one expected the judge to grant that, but our judge granted it and made a judgment of acquittal, meaning that the judge himself found us not guilty of those charges without hearing any evidence from us, only the prosecutor's evidence. Nothing went to the jury. We didn't even get any testimony before the jury.
Well, the prosecutor has to make the case.
That's true.
And so, but if the judge hadn't done it and have been just your testimony, you might have had some difficulties. I've heard some news reports, and they had some people, I don't know, I forget where it was, but either there are people on the jury or people in the courtroom or whatever, and they said, no, there's no such thing as this climate crisis.
That's right.
Just, straight out of Donald Trump's mouth. And
Right.
All that.
Right.
So you would have had a lot to overcome.
We would have. We spent an entire day, the first day of trial. As I said, the prosecutor's case was 2 witnesses the second morning of trial. The entire first day was picking the jury. And they were, we'll give Clearwater County credit for this, because they made a big effort to get a big jury pool so that, we could challenge people for cause if, they were expressing bias, and some of them did.
They did.
They some of them flat out said, well, climate change is a hoax. And, I think, I don't think I can be fair to these people. They were honest about that. And so we did have, I don't remember how many dismissals for cause, but it was probably 7 or 8 people who were dismissed for cause. And then we had a large number of people that each side could just, this is standard in criminal cases too, where the prosecutor gets to strike a number of people and the defense gets to strike a few more, because, we're the ones on trial, for no cause, just, for whatever reason we think, but we don't have to state a cause.
Yeah, it's case that I was involved with, we had 3 different trials. In the third trial, the judge let in all this testimony with expert witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the very end, he said, well, I was the first one to ever do that, but you can't consider it.
Right. We've seen that once before with the climate necessity defense in the state of Washington in what we call the Delta 5 case, where they had blockaded an oil train in Everett, Washington. And the judge did something very similar. He said, well, okay, you can go ahead and put these experts on. But at the close of the evidence, he instructed the jury to disregard it all because he did not feel that it had met the legal standard of a necessity case.
So if you hadn't had your case dismissed, you all would have been saying something from the witness stand.
Right.
And then you would, if you'd been, well, you could have been convicted.
We could have been convicted.
You could have convinced them. It would have been hard, but you could have convinced them, and you were prepared. You said when I had you in the station a year or so ago that well, you're prepared to go to jail, prison if necessary.
Yes, we were prepared for that from the beginning. We made the decision to do this action with the knowledge that, there was a fairly high probability that we could end up doing some prison time. And we all felt that the situation is so dire. I have 2 grown children. I would like them to have a decent and habitable world, and they are not going to have it within their lifetime. It is going to be horrific. It's already going to be bad because we've already left it so late that, with climate change, there's a lag time. So that when you put the carbon emissions in, what we're actually experiencing now, and we're experiencing, obviously with Hurricane Michael this week, we can see very directly the effects of what climate change is doing. And that is the carbon emissions that were put into the air 30 to 40 years ago. So what we're experiencing now is what we did in the 70s and 80s, and we've put, astronomically more carbon into the atmosphere since then. It just takes time for that to take effect. So we know that even if we were able to, by some miracle, stop all carbon emissions today, for the next 40 years, the temperature is going to go up at the very least. That is going to happen, and things are going to get worse. What we still can do is salvage some habitability for the planet, some possibility for, humanity to carry on in, a decent, if more austere way. But we're too late for a good outcome. Our choice now is between bad and absolutely apocalyptic. And, we want to do everything in our power to save every conceivable life that we can. People are already losing their lives to the effects of climate change. We just, want to stop it from getting worse.
Well, ever since I read about Hanson's prognostication about what was going to be happening,
mm-hmm.
It's like we're slow walking through history, and the powers that be, or everybody thinks it's too expensive.
Exactly.
Too expensive to save.
Which is why I say that, we can choose capitalism or a safe climate. We can't have both. That is the reality, and people really do need to face up to that fact.
What do you mean you have to choose capitalism?
Because you cannot have capitalism and have a safe climate, because capitalism values only profits. That's the only value capitalism has. And as long as you can make profits out of fossil fuels, the capitalist system will make sure that continues. So we have to move on to something more socialist, or we are doomed. That's the reality. We have to value human life over profits, and capitalism does the opposite.
Well, capitalism is part of the religion of more and more and more. That if you're not increasing, you're going to be overcome by some other capitalist, and so
and the reality is, even for the billionaires, ultimately this climate change thing is going to come around, and
they can't buy their way out.
They cannot buy their way out. They can, when the conditions of life on Earth become, no longer able to support human life, they cannot eat, drink, or breathe their money. That's the reality.
When you say socialism, how most people, well, there's a lot of people who say, oh yeah, what does that mean? Decisions being made?
It means
society?
Yeah, it means human-centered rather than profit-centered. It means decisions made by the people that affect them, are affected by them, rather than by a top-down elite that has money and property deciding everything, owning everything, and hijacking the entire political system the way corporate power has hijacked our so-called democracy. We simply don't have a democracy. We have an oligarchy. We have rule by the moneyed elite. They control both parties. I don't care whether it's Democrat or Republican. It doesn't matter to me. They're both hijacked by that corporate system.
Well, our current capitalist rulers have kind of distinguished themselves by unbounded greed.
Yes.
And that they are just, too much money is never enough.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've always thought that capitalism can't work unless it's more equitable. There's enough money sloshing around on the bottom but they seem to be going that we've got to have it all.
That's the logic of capitalism. It's all about extracting from the bottom and sucking it up to the top. And now we see that, I think it's something like 10 billionaires control 50% of the wealth on Earth. That's unsustainable. And that, is destructive of everyone's life that isn't those 10 billionaires.
Well, you're a political activist. I'm assuming you've given a lot of talks about this and many other things. How do people who respond to somebody like me who agrees with you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's people who disagree, but I see a lot of agreement too, and especially among young people.
Yes.
The one big hope that I have is for people my son's age. My sons are 37 and 32, so people who are their age and younger seem to get this in a way that my generation seems to have forgotten, if they ever understood. And that's what I'm seeing with them is most, the favorable impression of socialism, by those under 35 is something like 80%. They understand that, we have to move in that direction, that's our only hope.
It is our only hope. And it's interesting. This, our headline in the Star Tribune was most dire climate warning. Well, if you've actually been paying attention, we've had some of these similar things.
Mm-hmm.
I can never forgive Obama from 2009 when he went to Copenhagen. They virtually didn't do a darn thing.
I know. I was massively disappointed in that as well.
He got that Peace Prize for having done nothing, and the whole world wanted him to take the tiger by the tail, twirl it around, and make some big changes. But he was not going to do that. So 8 years. Well, he did a few things, yes, of course.
But that's why I say it doesn't matter. People. I know a lot of people, and am related to people and have friends who are people who have, to me, the very mistaken notion that what we need to do is elect more Democrats. I think that's a complete waste of energy, quite frankly, because the Democratic Party is just as hijacked as the Republican Party by corporate interests. They say nicer things. They occasionally do a few things around the edges, but they are absolutely unwilling to address the issues head on, whether it's climate change, whether it's police brutality, whether it's, immigration and how our, immigrants are treated, and on and on and on. It has to be system change, and the Democrats are never going to do it because they are just as bought. I tell people this is, nothing but a game of good cop, bad cop. And at the end of the day, they're all cops. So if you're voting for Democrats, you're just voting for a game they're playing on you. If you look at their voting records, it's something like 80% to 90% of the time, most of the Democrats and the Republicans are voting the same on most of these issues, approving the Pentagon budget, on and on and on, doing nothing about climate change. We, need a new system. We certainly need different parties that are not completely owned by corporate powers in both of the two major parties. I mean,
Well, the Democratic strategists now are saying, well, if the Democrats don't win in a month from now, Trump is going to feel emboldened to do even worse things.
I know what they say, and they've been saying these things for 40 years. And what have we seen? We've seen the more progressive Democrats get cowed into voting for people who do not represent us, who do not represent our values, who are largely corporate shills over and over and over again, because they point their finger and say, but the Republicans are worse. And what has that done? That has ensured that our country has moved further and further and further to the right. I will not be a part of that.
What about this woman from New York, the DSA? She threw out a number 4 Democrat.
Right. Are you talking about Ocasio?
Yes.
Yeah. I see some of these young folks like that who are absolutely, I think, meaning to really change things and are doing this from a very good place. But what I see is that the Democratic powers that be in the Democratic Party are going to corrupt them. And I've already seen with her backtracking, because I'm sure she's getting tremendous pressure from the DNC to, be more in line with their positions. But for instance, during her initial primary campaign, she was saying abolish ICE, which I think absolutely, and ICE being the immigration agency, being the Gestapo of the United States right now. Let's call them what they are. They are the fascist stormtroopers of our country right now. They are horrific in what they do, and they absolutely trample on people's rights. And she, the pro-immigrant movement has had a slogan of abolish ICE, and that was part of her campaign. And now that she's the nominee, I saw, the other day that she has said things like, well, I don't mean, I mean, reform it and move it to a different position and, reduce their funding. But I don't mean, of course, abolish all the functions they're doing. And those of us who are, involved in this, we do mean it. We do mean abolish it. We mean we don't want that agency to exist, and we don't want it transferred to a different department. We want it not to exist. We want people's rights not to be trampled on. And I think, she's backtracking because she's getting that kind of pressure from the Democratic National Committee, and they have tremendous power. If you want to run as a Democrat, you are going to be forced to take some of their positions, and that means things get watered down until they're not worth having anymore. So I worry about those young people who are trying to make the Democratic Party their avenue of changing things, because I think the Democratic Party is more likely to change them.
I'm speaking with Annette Clapstein, who is one of the 3 people this week who's had their cases dismissed for not being proved by the prosecution for their valve turners or climate change, climate activist changers. I got it underlined here somewhere. But what is Seattle doing? I know you have a socialist member of the city council.
We
there.
do, and she's like our one hope on the city council. Yeah, I mean, as far as climate action in Seattle, we've done a lot of trying to get banks to divest from investments in pipelines and fossil fuel energy. We've had multiple actions where we've shut down multiple banks for a day, occupied their lobbies, chained people to the doors. We had one day where we had, I think it was 103 Chase Bank branches shut down. So we've done a lot of the divestment kinds of things. we do a lot of work with indigenous groups and support their actions in, again, trying to deal with the fossil fuel infrastructure that, like in Minnesota, I know people here are having a big battle with Line 3 and Bridge trying to build a new Line 3, which was, just sadly approved. But that's not the end of the war, because people will be out there resisting. And we have a lot of experience in Seattle, in the Seattle area, because to our shock, we used to not be much of a nexus for fossil fuel things, but over the last, I think, 6 or 7 years, there's been something like 24 projects proposed in terms of things like oil train terminals and, huge expanses in liquid natural gas and pipelines and all kinds of things that we never used to have. The fossil fuel industry is trying to use us, like Minnesota, as a fossil fuel sacrifice zone. So we've had a lot of struggles against those things. We've had some successes, and we got, for instance, a proposed expansion of the oil train terminals in Anacortes, Washington. We defeated that. We've defeated a lot of them, a lot of the big terminals that they, were planning to ship fossil fuels to and then ship them out overseas. A number of those have been defeated. In most cases, people say, one of the elements of the necessity defense that we were going to use is that you have to exhaust your legal remedies. And people say, well, can't you do this through legal means? And my answer is no, you can't. Not when you don't have a responsive political system. So yes, we have, showed up at the hearings. Yes, we have, testified. We have submitted comments. We have lobbied. We've done all of those things. But in every case, in all of those campaigns, civil disobedience was also part of the campaign. And civil disobedience is what really gets their attention, gets them worried about their reputation, and usually is what finally moves them to do what they need to do.
Well, of course, as you well know, when in Seattle, as I was reading about it, trying to get money from the large corporations for homelessness.
Yes.
This was like, whoa.
Yes.
This is like Jeff Bezos, richest man in the world. He was going to be out there with tin cupping it on the sidewalk.
Right.
Because, they just say, what are they going to do? The capital strike, that they will just wreck your town, city, XYZ. They'll do whatever they have to just to.
Absolutely true. I was part of that effort also. I am involved in a number of struggles in Seattle in addition to the, fossil fuel issues. And we managed, the activist movement in Seattle, for lack of a better term, managed to get the Seattle City Council to actually pass a tax. We called it a head tax. It was a per employee tax on only the largest corporations in Seattle. So it was Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Boeing. Those were the people who were going to be hit. I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was over 100 employees, or maybe even over 500 employees. No small businesses were going to be hit by this. It was the big, big businesses. And Jeff Bezos, richest man in the world, threw a temper tantrum like a toddler and threatened to, stop building what he was building at that moment, some, expansion of his headquarters there, if the city council didn't withdraw this. And he spread a big disinformation campaign to small businesses saying, oh, this is going to tax you to death. You'll have to go out of business. And almost all of those businesses he was spreading that disinformation to would not have been taxed at all. But, he had the money to put that propaganda out there and scare people. And he got directly to our terrible mayor, Jenny Durkin, and she also lobbied the council in ways that I think are, borderline unethical at best and outright unethical at worst. And I think it was about 6 weeks after they unanimously passed this tax, they voted, so it was 9-0 in favor. 6 weeks later, they overruled themselves. They reversed it, and it was a vote of 7-2. So it was Shama Sawant, our socialist city council member was one holdout, and a woman named Teresa Mosqueda was the other holdout. And the other 7, even though they all call themselves progressives, sold out and, caved to Jeff Bezos' temper tantrum, and they reversed that. And so we do not now have a tax on the corporations. And Seattle has a homelessness crisis. I mean, this was money that was earmarked to build low-income housing and provide services to homeless people who are literally living in tents on the sidewalks all over Seattle. I mean, we are talking thousands and thousands of people who are living in the streets, and the city is doing nothing to help them.
And Seattle is a rich city.
It's a very rich city. I mean, I think we should tax Jeff Bezos' personal income at 90%. The city should put a tax on him, and if he doesn't like it, he can move elsewhere. Good riddance, because Amazon has come in and really wrecked the city as far as gentrification goes. Most people who are not upper middle class can no longer afford to live there.
Well, even just the way capitalism normally operates, all the money funnels to the top.
Absolutely.
And the only way...
That's the whole point of the system.
It just works that way.
Yeah, no, it's meant to work that way.
Concentration.
Yep, concentration of wealth.
And this is going to happen that way. And then whatever had been gained over, since World War II, there was a more progressive taxation thing, which has been under attack over the years. It used to be 90% tax in the Eisenhower years, but of course, most people didn't pay that because there's so many deductions and all that.
Right, but they paid a lot more than they do now.
A lot more than they do now, and of course, this most recent tax overhaul reform, they say, has funneled even a greater chunk of money.
We're back to the days of the robber barons. That's the system we live under now, and it's probably even worse than it was in that sort of era from the 1890s to the 1920s when wealth ruled and people were in dire poverty. That's where we are back to. If that's making America great again, no thanks.
Well, yesterday in the Star Tribune, they had a editorial, climate warning should spur action, but they say, well, the cost of inaction is steep. The damages could cost $54 trillion.
That's right.
That's with a T. And it's technologically possible, but not cheap. But and limiting global warming to 1.5, no longer 2 degrees Celsius.
Right.
1.5 would require rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. But that's the report there of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
Right.
But there is no documented historical precedent for such substantial changes, and
it could be done. I mean, if what's often used as the example is the complete retooling of industrial America for World War II. They very rapidly transformed car plants into plants for making weapons and tanks and whatever. So if there was the political will, this absolutely could be done. It would take a huge mobilization. It would mean a lot of changes in people's lives, but ultimately it would mean that our future generations have a chance at a decent life. And the problem is we have no political will because, again, it's all about the profits. And if they can keep extracting profits, I mean, I've come to the conclusion that the very wealthy do not care about their own children and grandchildren. There's no other conclusion I can come to, because otherwise they could use their wealth and power to, press for these things to be done. And they are only interested in continuing to extract profits to the very last minute and then let everything go all to hell. That seems to be their, plan.
For years, I've been saying the powers that be don't care about the North Pole melting because they can have cheaper, quicker shipping.
Right. That's exactly how they look at it. But what they don't look at is that when climate change advances, agriculture will fail. Agriculture is something that has existed only for the past 10,000 years. And if you look in geological time, a relatively unusually stable climate. You have to have a stable climate for agriculture. If you have wildly zigzagging, out of control storms here, droughts there, heat waves, fires, everything happening all the time, that's just extreme events, agriculture will fail. Agriculture will fail on a massive scale, and billionaires have to eat too, and they don't seem to understand that. If we're unable to grow food anymore, people are literally going to starve in the hundreds of millions, if not the billions, on this planet, and it is going to be horrific.
Yes, here in Minnesota, we have a lot more overcast, gray, because the jet stream is changing.
Yes.
And so that now when we get these rains, we're getting some of these heavy downpours. About 3-4 weeks ago, we had 5 inches in 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this really bad storm track over southern Minnesota,
Mm-hmm.
where there's a lot of agriculture there, including a lot of farmers that provide vegetables for our food co-ops and the like.
Right.
Are right down there, and so it makes it difficult.
Right.
Some have been
Right.
wiped out, washed out, and it's we're getting more and more of these changes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know a lot of people my age think, well, maybe it won't affect me,
Mm-hmm.
but this is rushing faster than
Yes,
any of us.
that's the other thing. It's accelerating, and if you think you might live 10 years, well, you're going to see some horrific effects already. And even if you're not going to live 10 years, how can you not care about who's coming after you? I don't understand that mindset. I just don't. Somebody said, and I quote it often, if we don't do everything we can to turn this around, then we are the most evil ancestors everywhere, and our great grandchildren will curse us. We have to. We know what's happening. We have to try to turn it around, and that's why we went out and did the action we did in shutting down the pipelines, because we need to stop this fossil fuel madness. Fossil fuel is a death cult, and I would like to see life on Earth survive. It's a beautiful, precious thing, and we have to do everything in our power to salvage as much as we can of this beautiful Earth that we were given. And again, we are just terrible stewards and terrible ancestors if we don't do everything in our power.
Well, in the last couple of days, ExxonMobil and BP, they've said, well, we're going to give $21 million for a carbon tax. Now, won't that solve it?
I guess it all depends on how it's imposed. There's a lot of back and forth about how you would have to do a carbon fee, carbon tax. There tend to be way too many loopholes in those bills. That's the problem.
Yeah.
If it was, absolute and couldn't be wiggled out of, yes, I think it would help a lot. What Dr. Hansen was proposing in his talk the other day was a carbon fee and dividend, and that seems a little more egalitarian to me, where the carbon is taxed. There's a fee imposed, tax, whatever you want to call it, at the source, basically, and it's huge. And all of that money is gathered and then paid out in dividends to the citizenry. Maybe, if it would be even more egalitarian if you say, if you're already making over 500,000 years, you don't get the dividend because you don't need it. But if it was paid out to everybody, then, he said he thought it would actually, if the fee was high enough, the poorer people would be making money off it overall. Yes, their gas prices would be higher, but they'd be getting this check in the mail for, $10,000 or whatever every year. And it would actually increase their income overall. So, I mean, I haven't studied that closely, but that sounds like a potentially good idea.
But essentially, all of us have to kind of ramp down our lifestyle.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to have to do that. And, if we don't do it ourselves, it will be done for us as things collapse.
There is starting to be more people in the artistic community, which have been responding. And so I saw last Friday night, the opening night for a brand new play at the Guthrie Theater called 2 Degrees. And the 2 Degrees refers to the 2 degrees to hold it down.
2 degrees is already going to be horrific. All of the scientists admit that now. That means, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of deaths. It means Pacific Islands underwater. It really is unacceptable. I hate to say it, but it's probably going to happen given the way things look right now. But we have to still try and still fight for all of that to try and keep it down below 1.5, where, we have a chance of salvaging life for a lot of people who had very little to do with causing this and are suffering the worst effects in the southern parts of the world.
Yes, they're not happy about it.
And they shouldn't be.
Yes. So anyway, this 2 degrees goes for until the 21st, and it's in the level 9, and it's cheaper price for plays than usually there at the Guthrie, and it's Prime Productions. This is their second season. I saw the first one. And it's for they have roles, and the whole thing is very well acted, but they have roles for women who are older, who are usually not.
How nice!
What a concept! I know.
Yeah.
So that's it'll be. I'm not sure if it's just Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or if there's anything on Thursday too. But you can check with the Guthrie.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice to go there. And there's another person who used to be a person who had a show here on KFAI, Todd Harper, who starting next week, and I'll give more information on next week. He's got a new what he calls a musical ecology, ending the war on trees.
Wow.
So, you could find out about Todd at troutsongs.com. And so, but I'll talk more about that next week. Well, is there anything we haven't covered?
I guess I would just add my usual call out to old white people to get out and take the risky actions, because we are in the more privileged position and we have little to lose and much to gain for our, grandchildren and future generations. We know, I've just been looking this week, seeing no DAPL protesters, Indigenous folks getting sentences like 3 years for doing less than we, the valve turners, did, standing in prayer. We know that the criminal justice system is horrifically skewed against people of color. And if they take the kinds of actions that we did, going out and shutting off pipelines, or, any sort of more risky direct actions, they run the risk of having the police show up and shoot them. That, obviously did not happen to us, would not happen to us. They see a little old white lady, they are a little more gentle. It doesn't mean that we don't end up charged with felonies and sometimes get convicted of felonies, as Michael Foster did in North Dakota, and he did 6 months in prison and, is still out on parole and potentially could do up to 3 years. But we are treated more gently by the criminal justice system. We owe it to, everyone on the planet to get up and give back and do what we can to stop this. So I ask people of my generation to get up, get out, do what you can to, because we have very little time. The IPCC report has made it clear that, we have maybe 2 years, maybe 12 years. They're saying, if we completely turn it around 12 years, we might be okay. I've read other people, climate scientists in the last few months saying, really, we've got to completely get this rolling, at least on a major scale, within 2 years, or we're done.
Well, there's a lot of people who. Let me play. I got a couple of questions about.
Okay.
Why can't we take stuff out of the air? But first, I've got to tell you that you're listening to Northern Sun News. Your host, Don Olson. You're listening to Kfai 90.3 FM at kfai.org. And I got to play a couple messages, but we'll be right back.
Hey, wondering where you can find your local music on KFAI? Join me, Crystal Wax, every Sunday night from 10:30 to midnight to listen to all your favorite local artists, discover new music, and everything else Minnesota. MSP Sound, Sunday nights on KFAI. See you there.
Programming on KFAI is supported by Southside Pride Monthly Newspaper. Locally owned and operated, Southside Pride supports the racial and cultural diversity of the many neighborhoods that make up South Minneapolis. More information is available at southsidepride.com.
It's back! KFAI Radio's third annual fundraiser fashion show, The Purple Ones 3. It takes place on Saturday, October 13th at Ken Wonderland, hosted by Quinn Shimmervilla Gomez of KFAI's Fresh Fruit and Rare Productions. A special musical performance by La Came, judged by 7 local luminaries, including last year's 2017 winner, Victor Pharma. Tickets are available now at Eventbrite and brought to you by Can Wonderland and the Color Wheel Gallery. So come on down to the Purple Runway, and you don't want to miss this special fundraiser fashion show.
KFAI would like to thank Marla's Caribbean Cuisine for their generous food donation during our pledge drive. Serving the Twin Cities since 2005, Marla and her team offer sit-down dining and catering. Find out more at marlascuisine.com.
Well, we're back with Annette Clapstein here, who's one of the defendants who had her case dismissed for the valve turners, people who had their case thrown out. So I guess I have one or two more questions. One more anyway, for sure. Why can't we have this great technology? Why can't technology take carbon dioxide out of the air and put it somewhere? What's wrong with that?
What's wrong with that is, first of all, that technology is pretty speculative at this point, and we don't have time. And we also, that's a huge uncontrolled experiment, even if the technology was ready, which it isn't. That we don't know what side effects it would have. It could make things, significantly, hugely worse. So, it's not ready.
What do you mean worse?
Anytime we as human beings have done in engineering things, there's always been side effects. So there's always unintended consequences. And that is a huge thing that has never been tried and will undoubtedly have some consequences that no one foresaw that could make things even worse.
Now, you're not referring to that guy off the coast of British Columbia who got this ship and they threw all this iron.
Yeah, I have heard about that one.
Iron
Yeah,
filings
and that was done on actually a very small scale. Imagine doing that on a planet-wide scale and then having it result in consequences that nobody expected.
So it's you don't think it can be done, but that's kind of like the capitalist out.
That is their out, and I think it's extremely unrealistic and far more fantastic than our idea of actually addressing the political problem involved and changing it.
And the political problem would mean that
we move the power closer to the people, one, and value human life over profit.
And we have to make decisions.
We have to make the decisions.
Not for the few.
Absolutely.
And we have to get the money from the very rich.
Absolutely. Right? All of those things.
And they're not going to want to give it up.
No, they're not, which means, we have to band together and find a way to make them give it up.
So either you do it through the legal system, the legislative system, or something where they're going to be fighting tooth and nail or general strikes. Maybe.
Right. I think general strikes is probably our next, biggest, best option. If we put a halt to their business as usual, then, that does force their hand.
I mean, this is something that socialists and people who have labor people
Right.
over the last.
It was actually done in
century.
Seattle in 1919, citywide. I think the first and biggest and one of the only general strikes ever in the United States. So I think maybe we need to revive our good Seattle history and do it again.
So this was just after the First World War,
Right?
Where there was a lot of opposition to that war across the country from people who, especially socialists, who referred to it, the Great War, as being just a capitalist
imperialist war.
Capitalist imperialist war. And is that what brought about the Seattle general strike, or was it just?
It was, I believe, and I'd have to go back and look at my history again. I believe it was more of a labor issue.
Labor, sure.
Yeah.
Because
their conditions were terrible, and they were, fighting for much better conditions across a wide range of fronts.
And you had quite a bit of historic action by industrial workers of the world.
Right. They were always very active in Seattle and still are.
So they certainly were active